Okay, so welcome to our second class of part two. I just wanted to discuss very briefly just the last page of section 4, where he talks about the dialects. He starts with a complicated aspect of it. Very simply, unlike Latin, say, Greek, the first Greek that we have is already broken up into various dialects, because the first Greek we have is Homer, and Homer writes consciously creating a literary dialect out of various other dialects, out of Ionic and Doric and so on. And that's not like Latin. So Latin, for example, had a very unitary use until it eventually broke up into what we now call the Romance languages from the Romans. And Greek is unlike that. It already appears in distinct dialects. So, but the first Greek we have is in what he is calling the Bardic dialect, that is epic, used by Homer and Hesiod. And then there are various developments, but the Greek that we most study, it's called classical Greek because it's the Greek that was used in Athens in the 5th century when the three great tragic poets, Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles wrote. The great comic poet Aristophanes wrote, and so did Xenophon, Thucydides, and some of the early orators, and so on. And so that's the classical Greek. And in 403, after they'd lost the war with the Peloponnesians, the Athenians froze their alphabet and they molded it on what the city of Miletus used on it was the Ionian coast, but now Ionian coast means the other side of Italy, on the west coast of the Persian Empire, in Ionia. And that snapshot, we're going to use these 24 letters. That is the language that we learn as ancient Greek. It was decided around 403, 402 by the Athenians after the Peloponnesian War, 3 years before Socrates is put to death. Now, the point that he makes at the beginning of this little section is that Diotima, who's this main character that Socrates talks to, pretends that he transfers his teaching to this prophetess, Diotima, and it's spelled Diotima rather than Diotimer, because a lot of the alpha endings turn to eta in Ionic, and her name she comes from a place called Mantinea, which is like saying she's a prophetess from Prophetville. Mantinea it's got the Mantiquae is the art of divination. She comes from Mantinea, another little Platonic joke. But otherwise what he says is, what he says is completely fine. I just wanted to give a brief to the overview. Okay. So let's start with quiz. So I don't want to make this difficult.
Can I just ask, what does Attic mean?
So Attica is the region within which the urban settlement of Athens exists. So Attica refers to the region governed by Athens. So Attic Greek is just Athenian Greek, basically.
Which is the same as classical Greek?
It's classical Greek because the greatest classical authors were all Athenians of the 5th century.
Right. Okay.
Right. So we learned their language in order to read their works. There were obviously great authors outside that tradition. Herodotus wrote in Ionian Greek, Pindar wrote in Doric, and so on. But the great authors that people learn Greek to read are Athenian of the 5th century, or Aristotle and Plato, who lived through the at least 20 plus years of the 5th century, and then wrote in the 4th.
So Attica is like Melbourne and Athens is like Geelong or something.
Well, Attica is a bit like Victoria and Athens is
Oh,
like Melbourne.
right.
Yeah. So Attica
So,
means the countryside and the city. So you know how there's this term city-state. So all of these nations, the Greek nations, consisted of one urban settlement with the countryside around it, from which it got all of its food and animals and so on. Yeah. And that's Attica. Yeah. And that's why, Attic attitudes, Attic dialect, and so on, just refers to the greater part of the Athenian
Ask a
polity.
question for a really quick answer. The word classical, I understand it completely. I have no idea where it comes from. Why do we use that word for the main thing?
It's a Latin word,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of our grammatical terminology is rooted in Latin translations of Greek terms.
Yeah.
But in the case of classical, it's because the classicus is the first line of the heavily armed infantry in the Roman army. Yeah. That's the first. It's the first thing, the highest thing, the best thing. Yeah, like the well-known Coca-Cola drink. The classic is the original and the best. Yes, first and best. Yes, yes. And in this case, the advertising is not false. In strict contrast to almost everything else we hear. Okay, so if I just get this whiteboard up. Okay, so what I think will be helpful, if I was just going to write 3 Greek words, and if you can write down what they mean in English, and if you can, it's helpful practice to write, for example, I'll start with, well, this needs to work. Okay, so this is an example. Here's a word, luo. All right, and if you can write as an answer, I, lose, first person, singular. It's always good to think in your head, in my own experience, is first person singular, present tense, active voice, indicative mood. But we haven't been looking at other moods, and we haven't been looking at other voices, so that's difficult to do. But yeah, if you can produce an answer like that. So if I write up 3 Greek words and just respond accordingly. So number 1. Eston. Okay, number 2. Polumen. And number 3, Luusen. Okay, so then I was going to write, going the other way is harder, especially initially. So I was just going to write 2 English words or English verbal phrases and see if you could come up with the Greek. So again, I'll do an example first. So if I said you, and I'm referring just to one person, you singular, are loosing, then the answer would be lues, second person singular. So that's, yeah, that would be ideal. So, okay, so number one. You are, that's actually quite a hard one because it's second person. And just, yeah, you singular are. That is hard because it's often irregular, the second person singular. Finally, if I say I destroy or I am destroying. See, David, this was appearing. All of this is appearing on here. And then for some reason, I have no idea. It just stopped. Maybe you see if it'll click back on, but
I'll have a little play with it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't see what I'm doing. So.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. 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 So okay. So yeah, I don't know. Does anyone want to volunteer for number one, Eston?
They are
It is.
they're plural.
It's third person plural. Peter, what did you say?
Oh, sorry, I just gave the translation. I didn't complete the
That's all right.
quiz.
What translation?
It is.
Yeah. So yeah. So he, she, it is third person singular. Esti.
Oh, third person, singular.
Yeah, third person, but singular. Yeah, he, she, it is. Number two, apolumen.
We are destroying, first person plural.
Very good. Very good. Apolumen. We are destroying, first person plural. Correct. And number three, luusi.
You plural, loosing, second person plural. No, yes, second person plural.
It's the plural, but the person.
Oh,
Is it?
it's third.
That's right.
Yes.
So how do we translate?
Oh, so that's they. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah,
Yep.
that's good. That's good. Luusen, they loose. They are loosing. Third person plural. Good. Okay, so the harder one is English to Greek. So you are.
Is it Aya, epsilon, iota?
It is. So just pronounce that A, you are. Yeah, second but A. So it's like that diphthong. We have it in English in rain. Yeah. Okay, last one. I am destroying.
Apolomai?
That's it. Yeah. Apolumi.
Apolomy. Oh,
Yeah. Apolumi, first person singular. Yeah. Okay, very good.
Martin,
Okay, so it doesn't sound like it's too far away, but obviously not quite automatic, which is to be expected. So it would be very good to practice those same patterns. The verb to be in the present tense, just because you have to know it and it's irregular and just requires memorization. Luo and apolumi, because they're kind of models of an or verb and a me verb, and we need to know those patterns. So yeah, just continue to write those out occasionally. And let's go. Yeah, let's get a fresh whiteboard. It was HDMI. So when I pressed that top button on the right-hand side, it did come on. But it just kept clicking off every 5 seconds. I'm not sure why. Okay, so this chapter by Beetham is quite short and there's only 2 points to it. The first is he's going to expand the verb from the active into the middle and passive sense. And secondly, he's going to introduce the demonstrative pronoun. Yeah, this is what happened. He kept going blacking out on this end. So we'll just see what happens. Okay. So first the verb. So an example of the verb in English. So if you say I am speaking, we need an entire verbal phrase to do what Greek can do in one word. So that's lego. Yeah. So we don't have to, so this is a verbal phrase because it includes the personal pronoun. And then it includes an auxiliary verb, in this case, the verb to be. Sometimes it's the verb have or will. And then what looks like the participle from the actual verb, the main verb. And all of that is included in the ending and the stem of the single Greek verb. Now, we do already have pronouns. So you could say ego, lego, ego. Now, if you put the ego in there, it's not necessary. So that makes it emphatic. And you're saying, I'm speaking. And that's for some reason significant. It's not you or her or him, it's yourself. So if you have the pronoun there, it's usually for emphasis of some kind because it's not necessary. It's already included in the ending. And we've had the pronouns in the first person. I'll just run through them very quickly as a revision. So pronoun in the first person is ego. In the second person, it's su. And we're now going to have demonstrative pronouns that can function to talk about things in the third person. And so I'm going to introduce this word, which means this, and very frequently. So in the masculine, it's hutos, and it has the very similar pattern to those adjectives like kalos, kaler, kalon, agathos, agather, agathon. So second declension endings. The one difference is that outside of the nominative singular, which is hutos, it acquires a beginning tau. So it's in the accusative, it's teuton. So that's when it's a direct object. So for example, if you say, so we have the verb didasko, which means I am teaching. If you said didasko teuton, it would be I am teaching this person. It's masculine, and it has the implicit sense of this man. So you could translate that I am teaching this man, or you could translate it I am teaching him, right? Technically, it's this, implicitly, man. I am teaching this one, this man. So that's the accusative, and that's the nominative. Is that so far making enough sense? Or so there's feminine. The feminine is halter, usually this woman, right? It also acquires a tau outside of the nominative, so it's tau tan. So I'm just going to modify my example. Sorry? Okay. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah. Solution number 24 fails. So if I said, I am teaching didasco tau tan. So I am teaching this woman. Or I am teaching her. Didasco tau tan. Now, I'm just going to give an example where they're in the nominative. Should have started with that probably. So, hutos didaske. So didasco, but didaske is the third person singular of the verb. So it means he, she, it. We have a pronoun in the nominative. So the nominative is the case of the subject. So huto didaske means this man is teaching. If I change that to the, whoops, that's the wrong one. To the feminine. And so, sorry. Halter didaske. This woman is teaching, or she is teaching. This one is teaching. Yeah, usually it's this woman. Okay, so, and if I said, Halter didaske tuton, it's this woman is teaching this man, or she is teaching him. This woman is teaching this man. Okay, so these pronouns, they're called demonstrative pronouns because they point out someone who is doing something. And we have a neuter, which is to, to. Now, the neuters are helpful because they're always the same, both in the nominative and the accusative. So if I said, Halter didaske tutor, Halter, this woman, didaske, is teaching tutor, and that's going to have to be the accusative, not the nominative. And so it's a direct object of the verb, didaske. So this woman is teaching this, i.e. this topic. How is that? Is there any? I'll run through just a couple more examples. Just a yellow pad lying around. No. Okay. Okay. Sue. Sue is the second person singular personal pronoun, which means you when you're referring to one person. Su lues, you are loosing. So the verb is second person singular, and that is in agreement with the pronoun, and that's a rule. The verb must have the same person and number as the subject. If the subject's made explicit, it must have the same person and number as the verb. And now if I said me, su lues me, you are releasing me. So me is the first person pronoun, but it's in the accusative. So therefore it's the direct object of the verb and not the subject. I could change that around and I could say ego luo se. So ego, that's the first person pronoun in the nominative. The nominative is the case of the subject. Ego luo means I am releasing, and se is the objective. It's the accusative case, which is the case of a direct object. So I am releasing you. Now you can, I've put the words in English word order, but both of them could be reversed. You could have me, for example, you could have me, su, lues. Me, su, lues. And that means you are releasing me. So the word order is different because word order has a completely different function in Greek, and we cannot use it to understand the grammar. We have to look at met first and see that it's accusative. So the role of this word in the sentence is to indicate something being directly affected by the verb. Su, that's in the nominative, so it's the subject or it's agreeing with the subject in some way. And then we have the verb, which tells us what the subject is doing and what it's doing to the object. But we can't look at it with English word order expectations. Okay, so just the verb more broadly. So the verb is distinguished by its voice, which is the relation between the subject of the verb and the action. Right. So in English, we have active and passive voices. So active is I release. And then you have some object, say you or them or whatever. I release. So the subject here is represented by the pronoun I. The subject is undertaking the action. It's doing the action. Right. If I said I am being released, now the subject of the action, which is again represented by the pronoun, the personal pronoun I, the subject is now the object of the action. The subject of the verb, the grammatical subject of the verb, is the object of the action described by the verb. I am being released. Yep, passive voice. It's passive because passive refers to being the patient, the sufferer of an action. Okay. Now, the difference between the active and the passive is, so the difference between does the subject of the verb undertake the action or are they affected by the action? And secondly, in the active, we are obviously explicitly told who is undertaking the action. I release you. In the passive, we're not told who is doing the action. I am being released. It doesn't say by who. So you have to introduce a prepositional phrase, I am being released by the CIA because I no longer post on YouTube about the Ukraine war or whatever. So you have to say by someone to indicate the agent. That's why I frequently think of this as the political voice, because politicians want to say things like mistakes were made, not I made mistakes. You know, people suffered, not I caused people to suffer in order to get votes or something. And for some reason, it's gone dark. Okay, it's come back. Yeah, so the passive voice, you don't know who the agent is. Maybe we just turn that off because it's, if you can see on there, just because it keeps making this screen black. Oh, is it better for you?
It's better now. Mine's
Okay.
gonna go flat.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Okay. Okay. Now, that's English, active and passive voices. Greek, verb, has 3 voices. So active, for example, luo, apollomi. So I release, the subject is undertaking the action. I destroy, the subject is undertaking the action. So that's the number 1 here is the active voice. Now, Greek has a passive voice and also a middle voice. So there's 3 voices. And I'm now going to introduce, okay, it keeps going black on my end. Yeah. I don't know if that's happening. Is the screen going black for everyone for a few seconds?
No.
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 Okay, no, it's just here. It's just the HDMI and this screen in here. Thank you for that. Wow. Well, maybe it's not because it's gone black again. Okay, we're back. Okay, the Greek has a middle voice where the subject is involved in the action or benefits from the action or is referred to in the action in some way, but it's not quite like the active and it's not quite like the passive. And it can mean different things for different verbs. My screen's gone black, so until I can, yeah, I don't know why. What? Okay, for some reason it's come back on. Okay, so an easy example is another word which sounds and looks like luor, but is not. So luor, I release. This also sounds like luor, but this means I, well, let me just get rid of this for a second. In the active, so I'm just dealing with a screen that's going black for 5 seconds and then back on for 5 seconds. I bathe. That's the active voice. I don't know what.
And sorry, just to clarify, is that pronounced exactly the same as I loose?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, just to confuse things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got mostly a black screen and it comes back on for 2 seconds and I can write. So I'll just do what I can. Now, that's, for example, if you said I am bathing a dog, you would say luor kuna, and kuna is the accusative for dog. Now, if you said lu amai, and this is a new ending that I can't complete because the screen's gone black. Lu amai, then you would be saying, I bathe myself. That is, I'm taking a bath. I am cleaning myself.
Martin, sometimes because the screen sometimes flickers black at my end now.
Yep.
My experience is that that's caused by, say, your laptop. It's trying to find another screen. So I'm not sure what you've got plugged in there or whether you've unplugged something.
Yeah,
but that's
because we were connected to another screen.
It's trying to switch screens.
Yeah, we've turned that off though, haven't we?
Yes, but is it connected here in any way?
No, I didn't do anything. I did have this cable. Thanks, Michael. That
All right.
it's just gone black after I disconnect. But hopefully that's the last.
All right, can I connect one of those USB things?
No, yeah.
Can I do that?
Sorry.
Can I plug into? Is that a USB point?
Yes,
Can I get power from that?
potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a go.
Thanks.
Okay, so then now, so this ending, omai, is the first person singular in the middle voice and in the passive voice for these verbs, right? So not for all verbs, we'll go into that later. But so I'll give you another example. So we've had this word luo, which means I loose, and this is the active. Now in the middle, it's lu am I. Now, the middle voice involves some reference to oneself. So I am releasing for myself. The colloquial meaning that this verb developed is to pay money to someone who then frees their hostage and sends them back to you. So luamai means its most common use is I ransom. Okay, so the subject of luamai, they're not the person being released. They're causing someone else to be released. And they're not the object of the action. They're not being released themselves. They're not doing the releasing. They're not being released, but they are causing or involved in or referred to in the action. So luamai means I ransom. I have someone else released in my favor. Now, the passive version of the verb has the same spelling as the middle. So then we have the passive, and it's also spelt luamai, and it means I am being released or being loosed. So that's passive, and that's similar structure to English. I am being loosed. The subject of the verb is I, in this case, the first person. And they're the subject, they're the object of the action. I am the one being released. In the active, I release or I loose, the subject undertakes the action. Now, in the middle, we tend to get these slightly unpredictable meanings because they've developed out of the notion that the subject of the verb is causing the action to happen, or they're making it happen for them. I'll give you another example. So didasko, which means I teach, that's the active. So I undertake the action. Didaskamai, in the middle. Now, this is causing teaching to happen for me. So if I want someone taught, like a son or a daughter, I immediately take them out of the school run by the Victorian government, and I have someone teach them. So didaskamai means I have someone taught. So I have someone teach someone. And then, okay, so that's the one that's not easy for us to predict. But then the passive, so that's the middle, and then didaskamai, it's the same spelling. It means I am being taught. The subject of the action is the subject of the verb, I, is the object of the action. I am being taught. So Greek verbs have three voices. Now, the most commonly used is the active. The middle and the passive, they're used much less, as in English, unless you're trying to get away with something. But they're still reasonably frequent, and we have to absolutely know the endings and how it works. And they have sometimes these particular senses. So lu or in the sense of bathe. Let's come back to that. So this is both the middle and the passive ending. So lu am I. If it's in the middle, it's I am bathing myself. So that's similar to, like a reflexive verb in English. I am bathing myself. In the passive, it's I am being bathed. That's passive. That's very similar to English, and that's fine. In the active, luo, I bathe something. So there, in this sense, it's similar to a reflexive verb, but that's not all that the middle verb is. It's a bit more broad than that. So, for example, in luo, release, in the middle, it usually, if you see luo mai in the middle, it usually has the sense of ransom, because that's having someone released in your favor back to you. Whereas the active and the passive, the senses, I think, they're very similar to English, so that's fine. Any questions about the voice?
I have a question. It's a bit obtuse, and there's an echo in that. One of the reasons I'm doing your courses is to become more familiar with Heidegger's thinking when he engages with Greek thinking. And for some reason or other, and I don't know why, because I've just not got enough knowledge, but the middle voice is very important in Heidegger's thinking. Can you give us a little bit of an entree into that?
I can give you a small example.
Yep.
So there's a very important Greek word that we're going to meet, but it's quite irregular, so we'll meet it later. So phainor, right, which means I bring into the light. If you use the middle passive ending, phainomai, and in the passive, phainomai. So the active sense is bring to light, or bring into the light. The passive is I am brought into the light. Now the middle is not passive. It's not being brought to light. It's not bringing something else to light. It's I bring myself to light. I emerge into the visible openness as such and such. I make an appearance, right? So it's something like I appear. I bring myself to light. And there's a participle that's formed from phainomai, phenomenon, a thing that brings itself to light. And we have the word in English, phenomenon, and in the plural, phenomena. And we use that because of German philosophers who've talked about things that come to light. And Heidegger makes a lot out of phenomena being those things that appear to us not because we've brought them to light or they've been brought to light, but because they emerge into the light out of themselves. And he wants to connect that to, the historical emergence of phenomena and so on. There's a difficulty with this interpretation, but I don't want to go into it because it's grammatically going to cause us headaches.
But that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's sometimes his very careful attention to the language, I think, is misguided, but sometimes it's a model of how you have to read. It just, sometimes I follow it and sometimes I think he's gone too far off the wrong track. Yeah, but it is a model of how carefully you have to read these texts. They're written like Plato. We only have geniuses, right? Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, Homer. The one exception that you read in intermediate Greek would be Lysias, who is not a genius. Okay, otherwise you're reading people with the kind of compression of meaning and language that is shared by very few people, Shakespeare, Goethe, and so on, if not exceeding them. So you can't pay too much attention to the details. Okay, after that brief exhortation, let us have a look at some of Beethan for some exercises, unless there's any other questions about what we've done thus far.
I found that little diversion really interesting. That was terrific. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, this is ultimately what we're doing this hard work and labor for.
Are there a lot of those where there's something interesting and peculiar that you couldn't guess but would have to look at for the history to know the meaning of it? Like what you're giving.
There are, I'd say approximately half the verbs in the middle are difficult to guess or impossible to guess.
Yeah.
Half of them make good sense. Like luo, I wash, luomai, I wash myself. But there are at least as many where it's like luo, I release, luomai, I ransom. It makes sense when you figure it out, like, oh, I release back to myself someone who's been taken hostage. But it's very difficult to guess in some cases. Actually, I just have to, I haven't run through the endings. So let me just get back to the whiteboard. We'll quickly go through the endings and then we can look at some examples. Okay, so we have, as in the active, luo and apolumi. I release and I destroy. That's in the active. We're now going to do the passive endings, which are pretty much the same. So, sorry, middle and passive endings. And yeah, you have to tell from the context. But we'll see that as we come to some examples. Okay, so first person singular is, and we'll use luo. So in the middle passive, luomai. Now, the second person singular as often is irregular. And so it's either lu er and eta with an iota subscript, or lu a, and it means you ransom. Third person singular, lu etai, he, she, it ransoms. Lu omatha, we ransom. Sorry, I shouldn't mean that. Second person plural, lu este, you plural ransom, and third person plural, luontai. So that those are the middle passive endings. So it could be middle, it could be luomai, I ransom, or luomai, I am being released. Luware, you ransom, or you are being released. And we're just meant to figure that out from the context. Now then, if we take the me verb, so we have the stem, apolu, and we have very similar endings to luor, or to the or verbs. So it's apolumai, which means this is the middle or the passive. If it's passive, it's I am being destroyed. If it's middle, it's roughly I am perishing. That is, I myself, it's not necessarily I am destroying myself, but I am perishing. Yeah. Yeah. So then apolu sai. So that's a more regular ending. You can see the second person singular in the or verbs has undergone some kind of contraction, whereas my, sai, that's more regular. Then the third person singular, I'm going to write this out in full just to make a point. Apolutai. So apolutai in the middle, I am perishing. In the passive, I am being destroyed. Now you can see that it's got the same ending virtually as luetai in the middle and passive. They both share this last three letters, and that's the whole ending for apolutai. Whereas the or verb luor has this epsilon, luetai. Now, this is what differentiates these two patterns of endings. The or verbs on the one hand, and the me verbs, I'm just using the letter V to stand for verbs. The or verbs have an extra vowel in the ending. So the personal ending here for the third person singular is tai. That tells us third person singular. That epsilon on the or verb, etai, that epsilon does not contribute to the meaning of that verb. It's part of the ending and we have to memorize it, but it doesn't contribute to the ending. And it's called a theme vowel. And that just comes from a Greek word tethemi, which means to place. It's just placed at the beginning of the ending. It's part of the ending, but it doesn't inform us. So what informs us in both these cases is the tai. So really, both sets of endings are very, very similar, but it's sometimes disguised by the presence of this vowel. I'll go on to the first person plural. So if it's apolumetha, that means if it's in the middle, we perish. If it's in the passive, apolumetha, we are being destroyed. Now you can see the ending in the or verb is the same. It's got that metha. That means first person plural, we. We are doing something, or we are undergoing something. For luor, it's lu ometha. In the same way in the active, it's lu omen. It's got that omicron there. That omicron, the omicron and the epsilon in these endings, and you can see it's all the way through, it's disguised in the second person singular from contractions. So don't worry about that. But in the first person, hidden in the second person, in the third person, first person plural, second person plural, third person plural, there's either an omicron or an epsilon at the beginning of the personal ending. It's called the theme vowel, and that's why all verbs are sometimes called theme verbs, because in the present tense, they have this omicron or epsilon at the beginning of the personal ending. That omicron or epsilon doesn't tell us the person and number. That's what the last few letters of the personal ending do. And these verbs that are called me verbs, they're sometimes called athematic. The alpha privative, which means without such and such, without a theme vowel. So the athematic verbs, apolumi, tithemi, histemi, these other verbs, and ami, I am, these verbs don't have that extra vowel in the personal ending, but otherwise the endings are quite similar. Okay, second person plural, polusthet. Again.
So wait, the word theme there is used.
Theme means, it just means an initial placement of an element, but it just comes from the word to put or place. Mm-hmm. So there is placed at the beginning in the theme verbs, thematic verbs, there's a vowel placed at the beginning of the personal ending, but which doesn't form part of the information you get from the ending. It's just there for phonetic reasons.
Yeah. So in Homeric Greek, all the contractions and stuff.
There are theme vowels there. Yeah. There are changes from how they're used, but
they're still there.
Yeah.
Even
yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, Martin. And thank you for that explanation. Because during the week, one thing that I was finding confusing was, the book talks about how, those me vowels, it kind of gives the impression that they're always going to be shorter, but sometimes they add in, sometimes they have extra consonants relative to the or verbs, like apolusi, has that sigma, but I think what I'm seeing now is that, the corresponding ending for the or verb is just the epsilon iota, and the epsilon is dropped. So it kind of doesn't matter that the sigma is added there. you're saying like it has the iota at the end. It also adds a sigma, but the important thing is it drops an epsilon. Is that how we should understand athematic?
Yes, it drops that omicron or epsilon that the or verb has.
Right.
But what you mean, you did bring up one of the ones that's particularly complex, the third person singular, and in all Indo-European languages, that's often irregular. And so we get that difference. We get that difference between the third person singular frequently in the active of the all verb versus me verb. So we have lu, a, he, she, it releases. And then apolusi, right, which looks like let me finish this last one and I'll come back to that because that's helpful.
Yeah.
So apoluntai, sorry, my writing's going off the edge because there's all these things cluttering up the screen and I can't see it. Apoluntai, so they perish, middle, or they are being destroyed. Yeah, so if you're looking at these endings, they're almost exactly the same except for the second person singular. And what's happened is there's been, the sigma's dropped out. The sigma in that psi ending for the me verb, that's dropped out. And so there's been a contraction between the epsilon and the I to give us air or a. Right? The details are more complex. I'm just gesturing towards what's happened. So and this is very frequent in the second person singular of one or the other, especially the all verbs. The sigma's dropped out. There's been a contraction. It looks like they're very different endings. They actually were originally deep in the pre-written language, the same, and then contracted. I'll just go to that example.
Originally, all verbs and me verbs were the same.
They did have the similar endings, yeah. So when we had, so the third person singular, Luwei, he, she, it releases, fair see, he, she, it says. And this is the result of, a theme vowel plus some kind of ending that ends up becoming a. And what it could have been is just the sigma has dropped out and the iota and the epsilon contract to a. And that's a very frequent contraction in words that a consonant, like especially a sigma, will drop out and letters will contract. But so just to suggest, there's no need to memorize this at all, but we need to memorize the verbal endings. But just to suggest that there is actually a deep similarity between all the patterns that we're looking at, and we'll build that up as we go. Okay. So let's look at an example in a text, just at some of his. So his translation, is so active. Apolumi, I am destroying. That's the active voice. Then middle, apolumai, either middle, I get destroyed, and I'm just translating it, I perish. I become destroyed. Yeah. I am destroyed, that's passive. I am being affected by the action of destruction. So middle, I perish or I get destroyed. Passive, I am destroyed. Okay. Now he introduces some new words. And he can introduce these because these words don't have a common, or they lack entirely an active ending. So there's no, for example, bulamai, there's no bul law. Bulamai is I want or I wish. It has this middle passive ending, but it has an active sense. Bulamai means I want. So it has an active sense, but a middle passive spelling. These verbs are called deponent because they lack a component. They lack the active voice with the active meaning. They have an active meaning in the middle voice. Gignomai it's the very, very common word. It's one of its stem is either gig or gen, and that gen is the word in genesis or genesis, which means coming to be. And so it's a very, very common word because it means happen, become, be born. as in the coming into being of something. So gignomai is very important, but in the present tense, it's a deponent verb. It hasn't got active endings. It's got gignomai, these middle passive endings, but it has an active sense that I am born, I am coming to be, I happen to be such and such. And here's an example of a compound verb, paragignomai. So para is a preposition. When it's by itself, it's a preposition, which means to the side of or at the side of. So paragignomai means to come to be to the side of someone or something. So it can mean to arrive or to be beside someone or something. And also, yeah, if it's with the dative, it can come to be the possession of. Okay, so there's a couple of adjectives. So genaios, genaia, genaion. So that it's got that stem gen that comes from gignomai. So genaios means noble in the sense of by birth, right? Genuine, authentic, or noble, as in well born. Whereas kalos means noble or beautiful, but in the sense of splendid, having an independent splendor, which is not related to birth. Right? Two very different understandings of nobility, or the source of nobility. Makarios, Makaria, Makarion. So like genaios, it's declined just like, not like, well, similar to kalos, kalei, kalon, except it has the alpha instead of the eta in the first declension, in the feminine. And similar with plusios, plusia, plusion.
So wait, where he's giving us 3 words.
Yes.
They are.
So they are masculine, genaios, masculine, nominative singular, genaia, feminine, nominative singular, genaion, neuter, nominative singular. So whenever he gives you those 3, that's saying this is an adjective, and this is how they decline. They decline from these 3 forms in the nominative, and so it goes down: genaios, genaion, genaiu, genaior, genaia, genaian, genaia, genaias with the sigma, genaia with the iota subscript. So it declines. And when you have those 3, most adjectives in Greek decline the way I've just done that. Genaios, masculine, second declension, like logos. Logon, logos, logon, logu, logo. Genaios, genaion, genaiu, genaior. Then genaia, the feminine, genaia, genaian, like Sophia, wisdom. Sophian, Sophias, Sophia, iota subscript. And genaion, like second declension neuter words, ergon, ergon, ergu, ergor. Yeah. So whenever you have an adjective, he'll give you the 3 endings for masculine, feminine, and singular, and you can decline them from there. Many adjectives have, some adjectives have 2 endings. The masculine and feminine are the same, and then you have the neuter. But we'll probably have that in a chapter or 2. Okay, so if we look at, let's look at a couple of these questions. So number 1, heuriskomai. So heuriskor means I discover. Heuriskomai, now that's got omai, the middle passive ending. So it either means I am being discovered, or it means something like I discover for myself. It's not common in the middle. So that I would assume, if I read that in a text, I would assume it's I am being found, I am being discovered. There is a middle use, but it's not very common. The second one, apokrinaire. So that air ending is the second person singular of the middle passive endings for all verbs like luor or legor. So he's got at the top here, apokrinamai, I reply. So this is the second person singular. It's the middle ending, air, but it has an active sense of you reply, second person singular of apokrinamai. Legatai. So that's the middle passive ending in the third person singular. And it either in the passive, it will be it is said. So something is said to be the case, or he or she is said to be noble or base or just or unjust or whatever. If it was the middle, which is quite rare for legor, it'd be I say for myself or I cause to be said, but I don't think you'll find that. You'll find legor in the active and the passive. So number 4, ekomatha. So ekor is a very common verb and it has 4 distinct meanings. I hold, as in I grasp, ekor, tuto, I have hold of this. Tuto is that demonstrative pronoun in the accusative. Or I have, ekor, tuto, I have this, as in I possess it. It can also mean I am able. Ekor legain means I am able to speak. And then if it's with an adverb, it means I'm in a certain condition. The most common adverb in Greek is aiou, meaning well. Ekor aiou means I am in good condition. So I just say that because we're going to see ekor a lot, and I'll keep describing these 4 meanings because then it'll be easy to recognize. But so ekomatha, we've got the first person plural of the middle passive ending. So ekomatha, if it was passive, it's we are being held. If it was middle, it would be we hold for ourselves, but that's not that frequent either. So I'd assume that was the passive. We are being held. Okay, let's go to number 8. So legusi. So that's the third person plural ending of the active verb. Legor means I speak. Legusin means they, third person's plural. Then we have hoti. Now, hoti is a conjunction which can mean that or it can mean because. It's used as that after a verb of saying or thinking. I think that, they say that, and that's what we have here. They say that. And then we have the sentence that is being reported. Hoi, thetaloi, and as he says in the footnote to the previous question, ho thetalos is the Thessalian, someone from Thessaly. So hoi thetaloi, that's the Thessalians, the people from Thessaly. Right? So legusin, hoti, they say that the Thessalians, genaioi, asin. So genaioi, that's this adjective here, in the nominative masculine plural. So therefore it's agreeing in gender, case and number with thetaloi. And then we have the verb, which is the verb to be in the third person plural. They are. So they say that hoi thetaloi, the Thessalians, asin, are genaioi, noble, nobly born. So that's an example of an adjective being used predicatively. You're predicating the adjective of the subject, the Thessalians. And you use that with a linking verb, in this case, the verb to be. It could be another linking verb like appear. The Thessalians appear noble or something. But the most common way of linking a noun and an adjective and predicating the adjective of the noun is to use the verb to be. He is this, they are thus, and so on. So they say that the Thessalians are noble. How's that? Questions?
So wait, what would be like the most basic literal translation?
They say that the Thessalians are noble.
Like it is said.
Yeah, well,
Like-
just like, it's something that people say. They say that Oppenheimer is rubbish. Or they say that these people are still going to be elected into power, and so on. Like, it's just people say,
Yeah.
they say, yeah.
What is it? It sort of carries some weight. It's not like ironic or anything. It's like,
We're doing introductory Greek. Irony is for later.
yes.
Yep. Yeah, but you know, as it happens, we have legatai, number 3 here, legatai. It is said. In that often does have an ironic sense, especially in Plato.
Mhm.
It's said, meaning it's said. It's not something I agree with, or it's not thought, you know. Okay, so that was reported speech after hoti, after this conjunction. Now we have another way of saying the same thing. Number 9, hoi theteloi. So nominative, plural. That has to be the subject or a word agreeing with the subject. Legontai. So that's legor in the passive, third person plural, agreeing with theteloi. The Thessalians, passive, are said to be genaioi. Now you could have after that the verb meaning to be. They are said to be, but it doesn't always have to appear. And as we don't have infinitives yet, that's a good thing for us. So the Thessalians are said to be noble. So how's that 4-word sentence? Can I explain anything further in that, or is that okay? The Thessalians, hoi theteloi, legontai, passive verb, are said. So the subject, that's the Thessalians, have the action done to them. They are said. And we don't know who the actor is. It could be by some people, by no one, by the Athenians. You would have to introduce that prepositional clause by so-and-so to find out who's actually undertaking the action of saying that the Thessalians are noble.
I have a question, Martin.
Please.
It's with reference to near the bottom of page 31. It says, but in Greek, the endings tell you which is the subject and which the object.
Yep.
So I can understand the object because we're learning about the endings of the object, but how do you know a subject by its ending?
Well, the verb here, so legontai, it's telling you that the subject of that verb is in the plural and it's a third person. So you can't say egor I legontai. Like there's some kind of error because egor is first person and legontai is third person. So the verb is telling us that.
My question was more general, but I mean, you're answering it with respect to question 9. But
Yep.
Can you tell a subject by the ending of in the word? You can
You
tell
can't
the object.
identify it, but it tells you the person and number.
Okay, so it's indirect then.
It's not indirect,
Whereas,
but it's only person and number. It can't give you the specific identity, but it says this is the person and number. So it could be a first person, and therefore it has to be I or we. Second person, you, singular or plural. Third person, he, she, it, a in the singular, or they in the plural. Yeah.
But wait, does the question refer to nouns or verbs?
This is the verb, the verbal ending. So the verb identifies, like a finite verb tells you person and number.
Mm-hmm.
sorry,
Whereas
I'm talking about a noun.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the noun it's in the subject form and the noun in the object form. The noun in the object form, we're being taught what the ending is, so you can identify clearly it's an object.
Yes.
How can you identify clearly the subject? Because I can't see how it has an ending that tells you that.
But that's this nominative ending, oi. Yeah. That's the nominative ending, and the nominative is the case of the subject. And as I sometimes add, all words agreeing with the subject, right? So we had an example of that here in number 8. Hoi theteloi. It's a nominative ending, oi. Second declension. It happens to be in the second declension. but it's a masculine nominative plural, nominative. So it has to be the subject or a word agreeing with the subject. Hoi Thessaloi, so the Thessalians. And then we have an adjective, genaioi. So that's either part of the subject or it's a word agreeing with the subject. And here, because it's the verb to be, it's being predicated of the subject. Right? So the ending of the noun or pronoun or adjective and so on tells us their role in the sentence. If it's a nominative, it's a subject or a word agreeing with the subject. Now, if it was hoi, genaioi, Thessaloi, it would be the noble Thessalians. And then we have a subject and we need to know what the action is described by the verb. Right? But that's when the adjective is placed between the article and the noun. That's the attributive use of the adjective. Here it's the predicative use. It's not after the article. It's being predicated of the subject.
What happens if there's no article?
Then you know from the context.
Ah,
Now
Ah.
in prose, you'll often have the article to tell you this is the subject, that's the predicate. In prose, you'll often have that. But also, yeah, I always laugh internally whenever I say the phrase, you can tell from the context, because we have no context. We're beginning to look at the language. But trust me, the context begins to develop the more words we see, and then you can see he must be talking about the same person who was the subject of the last sentence. So that's the subject of this sentence, and this is being predicated on, but we don't have that capacity yet. But so normally though, in prose, the subject will have the article, and if there's an adjective being predicated of it, it won't have the article, and that tells you that that is being predicated of the subject that has the article.
So Martin, in number 8, one of the things I've been thinking about is, well, if it's hoi thetaloi, then typically the article indicates that could be the subject of the sentence. So the Thessalian, so I would have thought it could be the Thessalians say that they are noble.
Okay, good point. What's happened is we have a conjunction here, and this is possibly a bit too complex for us. And Beetham does this. He often introduces elements that get fully explained later, well, partly explained later on. This is a subordinating conjunction. If you report something in speech, you say, she told me that she was going to do X, right? So then we have a subordinate clause that she was going to do X. Once you open that subordinate clause with this subordinating conjunction hoti, because you will generally finish that before you go back to your main sentence. If that wasn't there, this would be the Thessalians say something or other. But that subordinate clause is there to tell us that it's the following is a report of what they say. And then we have a new clause, and that means a new verb and a new subject. So we've got two indicative verbs, legusin and asin. And you can't have that in one clause. You've got to connect it. They say this and they do that, or they say this and they are that, or in this case, they say that these people are such and such. Yeah, so it's subordinated this reported speech to this main clause, which legusin. But that's beyond what we've seen. So it's not easy. But otherwise, if that hoti wasn't there, that would be the way to construe legusin hoi thetaloi. The Thessalians say blah, blah, blah. But it's there to say, here begins a subordinate clause that reports a thought or a speech.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I'm not sure if I should do the hardest ones or the easiest ones. Okay, this we'll try. We'll start with number 10. So this starts with the word pors, which means how. When it's got that circumflex on it, pors means this is an interrogative adverb, how, and you can see that it ends with the semicolon, which that's our way of indicating a question mark in the Greek text that we have. Right. Obviously, it wasn't there at all in classical Greek, which had no punctuation and no spaces between sentences and so on. So how? So the subject is hoi anthropoi. We know it's the subject because it's in the nominative and it's got the article, which generally indicates the subject. So human beings, people. Plusioi is the adjective. It's not between the article and the noun, or the article is not repeated. If that was hoi anthropoi, hoi plusioi, it would be rich people. People who are rich, right? Plusios, you know the god Pluto, it's related. Pluto, god of wealth. Plusios, wealthy, a wealthy. Plusios anthropos, a wealthy human being. Plusioi, wealthy, but it's being predicated of hoi anthropoi by the verb gignontoi. Third person plural, me, sorry, yeah. It's, it's a middle passive ending, gignontai, but it has an active sense because gignomai doesn't have the active endings of or, ace, a, and so on. It only has the middle passive ending of omai, gignomai, I come to be. Gignotai, he, she, it comes to be. Gignontai, they become. So how do people become wealthy? How do human beings become wealthy? That's that question.
It's an important question.
Well, subordinate to the question of how do they become happy, because wealth can only be instrumental to the question of happiness, but I concede, as Aristotle said, no equipment, no happiness. So, fair enough. Number 11, pors. So the same interrogative adverb. It asks the question, how? Tuto. So that's, tuto is a version of that demonstrative pronoun this. It's the neuter, so it could be the subject or it could be the object. And then we have pratetai. Now, pratetai is quite a common word. In the active, it's prator, to do or accomplish. So pratetai, I'm going to say, is the passive. Third person singular, is done. So I'm going to say that tuto is the nominative. It's the subject of pratetai, which is the passive. How is this done? Pors tuto pratetai. Any question about how that works? Okay, now conceptually, there's a fair bit going on in this chapter because we're introducing the middle and the passive voice. In terms of the numbers of pages and the numbers of words, it's quite short. It's only 8 or 9 pages. But conceptually, it's a leap because the middle voice is not in English and it's difficult to try and figure out what's going on. So I'm going to suggest try and work through section 5. If it's too much, and no one said anything this week. So when I said try and work through section 4, no one emailed during the week to say, you're insane. What we need is a human goal, and so on. But no one's done that. So please do that this week. If going through section 5 is not, is too much to expect on that.
For the record,
yes.
Sorry, for the record though, Martin, I personally, I spent a fair amount of time focusing on the quiz content, which like that wasn't so much section 4. So I perhaps need to revise section 4 during the week for what it's worth.
Okay. So that's helpful. Thanks, Dominic. And if anyone else wants to add their voice or send me a line, please do so. And what we can do is next week, keep going, explaining the middle voice. Try some other examples, look at some questions, and then you continue on section 5 next week. Or you've done enough, and I can go on and introduce section 6. We've got 3 more weeks, and I'd love to get to section 7 to actually read a sentence or 2 of Plato. But we have no timetable. It's not necessary. So just whatever. And I'm very conscious when I used to teach undergraduates, we'd have 8 hours of contact each week, plus at least 4 informally in office hours, and they were used. So that's a lot of hours, and we're doing an hour and a half. So I'm conscious that you're being left to do a lot yourself. So yeah, let me know how it's going during the week. That'll be very helpful. And next week we can either continue and look at section 6, or we can revise 5 and/or 4. Just let me know how you feel. Any final questions about anything we've looked at today, or anything else?
With these voices, so like in English, there used to be more the formal voice, the thou, and more upper class kind of thing. And I know in, say, Japanese or different things, there's very different voices, different way you speak, like a different, say, voice that we're
like German,
to speak
like
in or whatever.
See, do.
Yeah. Like a friend of mine went to Japan and hang out with the boys and got totally told off by the father of the house for just speaking
Informal.
Yeah.
Mm.
Is this something like that? Is passive and middle?
No. I mean, the thing about thou, like thou art a violet, like that's second person singular. We don't have one in modern English. We use the you for singular and plural, whereas thou specifically means you singular. But no, there's no formal and informal register. There are ways of doing that with the way you address people, but they're not part of the voice. No.
So it's not a particular person that would be going into the passive, or a particular situation. So
no, it's more the meaning of the action. Yeah. Is the action happening to the subject, or do they undertake the action? Yeah.
So they're being kind and nuanced about where they are.
Where the subject of the verb is, yes. Yes. And that the middle voice allows this nuance that we don't have it in the same way. We get around that. English has a lot, we use prepositional phrases and word order to build that meaning in.
And give an example.
Well, or we use a new word like ransom. I'm having my daughter taught. That's didaskamai. I said this in my head. I said didaskamai tokta, but that's German. Thugete. I have my daughter taught.
So we just use more words.
We just use more words. Yeah. So Heraclitus can say in 3 words what takes 24 in English. Yeah. If there's no other question, then thank you for bearing up, and please be in touch if you have any questions or difficulties, and we'll speak to you next week.
Thanks a lot, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.